Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. I'm back today. My name is Steven Railston to host this episode, and I'm joined by the most popular man in Manchester, Samuel Luckhurst. But before I ask him how he is, we'll get into Chelsea, that performance, obviously the 2-1 win on Wednesday night. We'll discuss the banning of journalists from the press conference earlier in the week, and we'll look ahead to the Bournemouth game this weekend. So now that's done with. Samuel, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well indeed.
Good to hear. Nothing's happened this week, has it?
No, it's been really quiet week, very quiet. But fortunately for everyone concerned, United won, so there's been some positivity back, as I'm sure the communications department have realised you get a positive result, there are positive pieces.
It was the perfect response, really. They had to respond after that Newcastle game. It was abysmal, that performance up in the North East. A few days later, Ten Hag said at his press conference the players were still behind him, that he had the backing, and they really had to show that in that game. 2-1 in the end. United created a lot of chances. Chelsea had their chances as well. But a convincing performance in the end, and they deserved the win, and it was a very important 3 points.
You select motivated players, you get a motivated performance. It couldn't be anything other than intense from United. It would have been unforgivable otherwise. They didn't really expend much energy against Newcastle. They pushed a little bit towards the end, but they were really, really poor. As we discussed, it was the manner of the defeat that was alarming, not so much the scoreline. And as we saw with Newcastle last night, if there are injuries in certain places, you can have a bad day, but United have had a lot of those bad days. But then they had a very good night against Chelsea. I think what was impressive about them was that the penalty miss on the 9th minute, it might have been, or the 10th minute, that could have really gone against them. That could have really deflated them. But instead, I think they maintained the intensity and the tempo they were playing at from before the penalty, where they had, Højlund had a very early shot that was saved. I think they might have had one or two other chances. And then they only had to wait 10 more minutes for the goal. And again, they concede just quite close to half-time, and that was always the danger, missing those chances, not putting Chelsea away. But in the second half, they were the better side in that half as well. It was a really encouraging performance. I thought that the front four, it always had to be that front four. But Amrabat coming in, I thought Amrabat would play as well, just because at the moment, the way Ten Hag is managing Kobbie Mainoo, and this isn't a criticism, if anything, it's the opposite. He is going to put him in, take him out of the team, because he's not had much competitive football in his career, and he's not long still since come back from injury. I thought Amrabat had by far and away his best game for United. They adjusted well to the half-time change. It didn't actually get asked whether Lindelof's removal was tactical or enforced. I think we all assume it was enforced. But Luke Shaw's, he's almost as good at centre-back as he is at left-back. But Reguilon was very energetic. So they had 3 setbacks in that game: the penalty miss, particularly the timing of the equaliser, given how they dominated, and maybe not so much a setback in terms of the substitution, but they had to adjust to that. And they adjusted superbly to all of them. And I think the supporters, you could tell from, how engaged the crowd was, that they liked what they saw, and so they should have done. True to form, United have won another game by 1 goal in the Premier League, but there's immense merit in that. You only have to look at the Premier League table, not having any draws, and with it being as cutthroat as a win or a defeat, it has actually played into their hands somewhat. Looking at, I think it's still very, very premature to call it a plight at City, but City have had a number of draws recently, and all of a sudden United are on their coattails, which I don't think any of us expected to say at any point this season. But it was a very, very good night from United. McTominay rightly man the match. And there were a few individuals, as we discussed last week, before the club had tried to put this negative spin on journalism regarding Manchester United. There are a lot of good things going on there at the moment in terms of Garnacho's form, Fernandez's form, McTominay's form. Obviously, Mainoo didn't start in midweek, but Maguire's he's probably in his best form for United in 3 years, I'd say. It's you're looking around that time frame. Højlund didn't get a goal, but he gives you presence up top, and Antony as well was another success story in the week. So as I said, there are players there that if they're picked, the fans will get behind them and the team will deliver. There were players picked against Newcastle that at the moment the fans can't get behind, and the team didn't deliver that evening.
think it's fair to say it was the performance of the season, actually, because you look back to that Crystal Palace game, the 3-0 in the Carabao Cup in September. For all that was a very comfortable night, and it was just very easy, wasn't it? Palace were awful and sat back a low block, as the Hibsters say these days, and there was a severely weakened side that came out again a few days later.
I think they pressed the eject button that night. They
did not want to win that game, but he sprung a shock a few days later.
He did,
didn't he? So that was a masterclass from Hodgson. Although the wheels have fallen off for Crystal Palace since then. Individual performances, then you've mentioned McTominay. We'll have to heap the praise on him because I think he's really stood up and been counted this season. When you look at that Brentford game, a brace in that, a few months later he does it again. He's become a bit of a goal machine all of a sudden. And we're talking about McTominay and how effective he is coming into the box late, and the runs that he makes, almost, dare I say, Samuel, Frank Lampard-esque, Steven Gerrard-esque. But he's in the goal scoring form of his life. He's now got 6 goals. He's United's leading goal scorer. If someone told you that at the start of the season, you wouldn't have believed it, would you?
No, but that's the beauty of football. The always expect the unpredictable, and he deserves immense credit just for the starting point. They were prepared to sell him in the summer, and in hindsight, it was just as well that United valued him at more than £30 million because his value is going to be a hell of a lot more than that at the moment. And he always, I think, to have come through the academy and been. Not won the ugly ducklings exactly, but he wasn't someone that...
It's not a glamorous period.
People weren't shouting from the rooftops about this kid called Scott McTominay, but he overcame being one of the more underwhelming players at that level. Then when Mourinho gave him his break, it was, I think people were looking at it thinking, and myself included, you're thinking like, what's this, favouritism or nepotism? Then he does well under Solskjaer. He endears himself to Rangnick as well. He was probably one of 4 or 5 players under Rangnick who did all right or did well. And although at one point it seemed like he had been rumbled by Ten Hag, he's been a mainstay in the team over the last 2 months. That's 4 or 5 different managers from very different backgrounds, from very different worldviews of football, who he's endeared himself to. In that respect, he's a little bit like, and you know, there are some similarities, but he's a little bit like Fellaini in that he has these unique qualities. He's not... I don't think anybody is looking at him at the moment thinking that in an ideal Manchester United 11 that he would be a first teamer, but he does have merit. And I think Ty said earlier this season that if Ferguson was in charge, and not just because of the Scottish factor, but he would have absolutely found a consistent role for him in that squad and ensured that he was kept content season after season so that he was a fixture at United. And he has been a fixture at United, and he's had to change roles. There were times under Solskjaer where he did do well as a defensive midfielder, where he was playing a deep line role, and Solskjaer, set on that pivot with Fred. But he has always had a goal-getting nous about him, and Ten Hag referred to it as a smell for the goal in the week. And I think he had 5 attempts the other night against Chelsea.
I think he's been misprofiled then, Samuel, over the years, because, I mean, there was that kind of... Everyone thought he was a striker in the academy at one point. He actually came out recently, said that was a lot of rubbish. But he's played as a 6, as you say, in that double pivot with Fred, McFred. Very, very famous. But he's fantastic, isn't he? He's best seen making those late runs into the box. And as Ten Hag says, he's got a smell for goals.
Ty said that he kind of epitomises this United side where he doesn't throw caution to the wind. He's quite gung-ho. He'll get forward. But, of course, that'll mean he leaves gaps behind. And Chelsea were dreadful. I think they were, in terms of, you're talking about that Palace game earlier, I think bar that Palace League Cup game, I think they were the worst side who've played at Old Trafford this season. They were so disjointed, so no real... I mean, they are an erratic side anyway, as we've seen with some of their performances and results this season. But they still had probably 4 or 5 really good or great chances. And that was a consequence of United still being a porous team. And you do get that with McTominay. I know Amrabat is there as the sentry, but he likes to press as well. And there were times where he was trying to press in Chelsea's third, and Chelsea would play the ball in behind him. So although United would pause at times, I wouldn't necessarily say you'd pin that on McTominay, but he has played that role before where he has had to be more disciplined and reined in. And certainly when he came into the team under Mourinho, he was a safe player. He'd get the ball, he would just pass it. He wouldn't really do much. He didn't really score goals. He didn't really create goals. I think it took him... I think it was after Solskjaer was made permanent manager on a permanent basis that he got his first goal for United. But he has had these spells in the team where he's come up trumps, and he has. There is a. This is not me saying McTominay is like Paul Scholes, but there are certain times where he can make a run into the box. It is a little bit of a throwback to when Scholes would ghost into the area, but it's a very different type of run. I think it's that eagerness about him. He will just, if his team needs a goal, he's going to do his utmost to get it. And it's just as well because you look at United, I think United are the lowest scorers in the Premier League table as it stands, in the top 13 with 18 goals. I think they might be the only side that haven't broken 20 goals yet, which is extraordinary. But one that shows you that through efficiency and a bit of functioning, they've got these narrow wins. And also they've had to rely on unlikely source of goals. I wouldn't necessarily say McTominay is an unlikely source of goals, but he's an unlikely man to be at the top of the goal scoring charts for them. And it's just as well because he's put 6 points on the board in the Premier League with the games against Brentford and Chelsea, and you just only have to look at that in the context of the table. What a huge difference that's made.
He's been fantastic for Scotland as well. He's probably almost single-handedly drive them to the Euros next year in Germany.
Was he the top scorer in qualifying?
I think he was. I think he was at some point. I don't know if he ended it as the top goal scorer, but he had a phenomenal.
France did win. What was it?
It was
12-0 or 13-0 the other
so
week.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
Did you see the footage of half time in the France dressing room?
No.
He went to work. I think it was only like 5-0 or 6-0 or something like that at half time. And he basically said, "This is the record. Go get it and kill them," which was pretty ruthless. But
I like that. There's a lot to be said for that. It's a winning
mentality, isn't it?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Instead of taking your foot off the gas. When you think of the best United teams over the years, they've always had excellent wingers. And Antony and Garnacho, I thought was a real kind of throwback performance. They were both really, really effective. Garnacho has been excellent in the last few weeks. He's really made positive strides as a starter because we've always said that's been his biggest area for improvement. We've heavily criticised Antony on this podcast and deservedly so. But to be fair, the last 2 weeks against Galatasaray, probably his best performance.
And then he topped it probably against Chelsea.
There you go. And he probably aggrieved. He probably would have been aggrieved to be dropped against Newcastle. So look, 2 positive performances from them too. The second goal, the match-winning goal from McTominay, Garnacho put the cross into the back post. So really impressive from both of them on the wings, wasn't it?
It was, and Garnacho, what I liked about him in the second half in particular was that he attempted another overhead kick or a scissor kick, and it was absolutely not the right
Ali
thing
McCoy said on commentary, "You've already had your stuns all in your career, son. Don't try that again now."
Yeah, it would. I don't think Lightning.
It's been greedy.
He's never going to strike twice again. If it does, then he's probably a more sensational player than any of us think. But after that, it was noticeable that Ten Hag told Rashford to warm up, and some others warmed up as well. But then immediately Garnacho, he got the ball, he burst into the area and he had a curling shot, and it wasn't too far away from hitting the target. And sometimes you look at it and you think, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that's the desire of him. If he sees that his place is about to be taken, he is the kind of player who is going to get going again or take it up a notch. There were some players in that United squad who have an air of entitlement and just expect to keep their place. And I don't get the sense of that with Garnacho, and it shouldn't be the case. He's only 19 and he only made his debut 18 months ago, whatever it was. It's been an incredible rise, but his work rate, and sometimes that's the thing you see with wingers. The acid test for them isn't necessarily what they do in the final third, it's the work rate. Are they mucking in? And he does muck in. He's still got a bit of a way to go in terms of being a more dependable shield for the fullback and whatnot. But he's been excellent. I think you have to look at his form through the context that he is a 19-year-old. And it was interesting that he was dropped from the Argentina squad last month, and Scaloni said it was down to his form, which was, there was some rationale to it in that these run of starts that he'd had the first 3 or 4 games, he hadn't really done a great deal, but I thought there was some real signs of maturity. Like the second half against Fulham, he was quite consistent the way he attacked in Copenhagen. He was going down to try and kill time. And now he's starting to add goals to it, and he got an assist the other night. And he's not necessarily one of these players in terms of providing service for the striker that you would associate that kind of cross that he produced from McTominay, but he did do that last season. I think it was against Aston Villa in the League Cup. He was even further out. It was an even better curling cross, and McTominay, it was one of those time runs by him, and he volleyed it in. So he's at the moment, he's undroppable, and he has been for quite some time. There's a reason why he's been starting on the left in the last 7 or 8 games, and when he did come into the team, I think a lot of people thought, well, it's about time, because he had been coming on in games and having a good impact. In terms of the comparison between him and Rashford, I always go back to the first goal against Brentford, and that Garnacho's doing a lot of legwork down the left-hand side. He gets the byline, he pulls it back, it leads to the goal. He kept the ball in. You go back to the Brighton game in September, Rashford needlessly in a similar position at the same end took the ball out, and Højlund scores, thinks he's made it 1-1. The goal's rightly disallowed. Højlund's still not got a Premier League goal. That was Rashford overdoing it. Garnacho, who is, he's 19, Rashford's 26. He doesn't overdo it. In a lot of ways, he's actually more mature than Rashford is when he's got the ball. And on the other side, Antony, I was just impressed with him from start to finish. It was his first.
Before you get into him, do you want to blow your own trumpet for a second and reveal what Ten Hag said to you in the post-match press conference? I'll give you the opportunity since I'm kind.
Well, you're always kind, Steve. But no, it was afterwards. I mean, we'll get into all the what happened earlier in the week shortly. But I was in the press conference, and I was granted a question, and I said it seems like he seems more motivated after coming out of the team. He's done well over the last week, and Ten Hag, I think he said it was a very good.
Oh, come on, you know what he said. It was very good opinion. Good opinion.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. If that's it for base.
That's it all coy there.
Teacher's pet now, clearly. But I just thought when you go back to the City game, and there was that clip of him shaking his head while he sat on the bench, and he comes on, he's fortunate not to get sent off for kicking out at Jeremy Doku. His attitude was the polar opposite of that. He obviously won the penalty, maybe somewhat not fortunate that it was definitely a penalty, but his first touch was heavy, and that drew in the challenge from Fernandes. It was absolutely a spot kick. But when Fernandes missed it and Garnacho put the ball over, Antony was immediately imploring the crowd to remain supported, to remain on side with the team. When McTominay probably should have had a hat-trick.
He definitely
20 seconds after kick-off from his second goal, because Antony intercepts Sanchez's bad kick, lovely reverse pass, and McTominay just, he got his finish all wrong, but Antony is immediately there to pick him up and encourage him. There was a point in the first half, midway through, where Ten Hag had brought Antony over, had a conflict with him, had his arm around him. And you just thought his body language, the way Ten Hag's responded to him, the way Antony's playing, he's receiving the ball more in the final third. He looks quicker. He's using the ball better. Taking him out of the team has definitely had the desired effect. I think when he turned up in the starting 11 against Galatasaray, I think a lot of fans and punters like ourselves would have looked at that and thought, well, he wouldn't have been in my team. But a manager sees a lot more than we do, and he'll have seen how Antony's training and whether he needed to be motivated. And he might have looked to that game from 3 weeks out when Rashford got sent off against Copenhagen and thought, well, that'll be the game Antony comes back in. I'm not going to bring him in against Everton for whatever reason. But the whole man management of Antony in this period has been, it's still early days, because it's only been 9 days since he came back in against Galatasaray, but it has been impressive by Ten Hag, and he's definitely elicited a reaction from Antony. And his challenge now is very obvious. It's to break his duck. He's not got an assist or a goal.
Just about to say that, still not recorded a goal or assist.
Yeah,
it's just disappointing.
His last goal was against Forest in April, and that was still, I'd say, his best performance for United. That was the day when Ten Hag likened him to Arjen Robben, and I think I'd even done a piece before them saying that he's got to aspire to try and just mimic Robben. I don't think he'll ever get to the level that Arjen Robben did. He was a world-class, garlanded player, won a Champions League final, got to a World Cup final and World Cup semi-final with the Netherlands. Just had an absolutely amazing career. But in terms of the way he played, that has to be the blueprint for Antony, because Robben was predictable, but he was brilliantly predictable.
I know his left foot is obviously his strength, as you said, and you know what Robben's going to do, but you just can't stop it because he was so brilliant, and Antony has to get to that level. But it is so frustrating sometimes. There was a chance on the edge of the box, and it was way more convenient to hit it on his right, and he actually hit it on the outside with his left.
Yeah.
Can't remember where it was, but you just think, oh, come on, use your right foot. And sometimes I think, can he actually use his right foot? He does pass with it.
I think he did get a goal, was it against, and it was literally a tap in against Everton in the Cup last season where he slid in and it did go in off his right.
You never see him shoot from the edge of the box or from outside the area for a distance of his right foot, do you? I don't think I've ever seen that.
That's something about Garnacho, going back to that Brentford game. The equalising goal comes from him going on the outside and putting the cross in with his left foot. And in fairness to Rashford, he was doing that last season. He had more variation about his attacking play. Unfortunately for him, he's regressed this season. And as you said, United were a lot more dynamic with Antony on the wing.
Come on to Rashford in a second, but that's it for part one. We'll be back in a moment for part two. Welcome back to part two of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, as Samuel just alluded to, Marcus Rashford was on the bench, of course, and Anthony Marshall. They were both dropped. Ten Hag said before the game, look, we were poor as a team against Newcastle. Let's not blame individuals. But both of their performances against Newcastle were almost shameful, dare I say, especially Rashford, the lack of work rate. It was the right decision to drop him, wasn't it? No one was surprised. And he's facing a fight to get his role back now because Garnacho has just been so brilliant.
Yes, and look, there are always a lot of games for United to contend with. I think they've got 8 games in December alone, so it's inevitable he will start one of those games because for freshness, although they have got a free midweek the week after next because there's no League Cup quarter-final. But I thought it was interesting. It didn't get a lot of coverage after the game, but there were definitely a smattering of boos, you could call it, when Rashford came on for, was it Garnacho he replaced, I think? I think it was. They were countered by those in the singing section chanting his name, and I certainly...
Is it that, for my opinion, is that not an example of your hardcore supporter who are there each week and perhaps, dare I say, your fans are occasionally coming along now and then, maybe for a day out or a season?
Possibly, but I think...
Then there's also been kind of size and a lot of the fan base have been getting frustrated with Rashford. It's not just been kind of that divide, I suppose.
No, and you only have to look at his relationship with the match goers this season. It's been going that way because they've been a lot of audible sighs of exasperation at his body language, at his at the perceived lack of commitment for certain challenges. If there's a challenge, they've thought he's not gone in full-blooded for it when he could have done. I think it really started with the Brighton game in September, where he had something like 8 attempts at goal that day, but he was a really erratic performer, and United were very, very well beaten by Brighton. And of course against City, when he was substituted, that was cheered. It was quite audibly cheered as well. He's not the only player that's happened to this season. And then when he performed the way he did against Newcastle, not only was it such an abysmal performance, but then everyone went to town on him afterwards. Pundits, punters, whoever. I mean, Jermaine Genius was highlighting how bad he was at half-time, never mind at full-time. I didn't hear any cheers for his withdrawal or Marshall's withdrawal. I mean, the away fans are very, very high up at Newcastle at St James's Park, and they were pretty supportive of the team until the end, I think, on Saturday night. But I did wonder when Rashford came on what the reception would be, because as we are all very well aware, there are quite a few things going on in the background at Manchester United, and a lot of supporters are thick, frankly, but a lot of supporters are not thick. You know, I'm not saying it's this percentage or that percentage, but there's some who are a bit more clued up than others. And I don't necessarily think that would have been day trippers or tourists who just booing Rashford. I mean, it came from the scoreboard end, which it certainly used to be a lot more atmospheric a few years ago. That singing section used to be over there. They've moved it pretty much to the Stretford end, or rebranded that corner around the tunnel as the Stretford end. So I certainly don't think it's ever a good look when supporters are booing a player. I mean, you're there to support, and that's what happens by and large. But occasionally there are times where a crowd will turn on a player. It happened to Harry Maguire a couple of years ago when he was cheered, when he was substituted. I think it's happened, obviously, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, the last time he faced up Manchester United supporters as manager, he was booed by them at Watford. Ryan Giggs copped it. I remember when he was having a really poor spell of form in early 2003.
Didn't you cop it as well when you went in the press box? On Wednesday night, you got booed as you arrived?
I didn't. No. The only supporters who stopped me to talk outside, who I should declare I know anyway, just wanted to talk to.
Have a catch up.
Yes, indeed.
Well, it's completely different online, isn't it? In real life, everybody knows that.
Yeah.
Rashford's obviously very low on confidence, and the longer that Højlund goes on without a league goal, surely it's going to start playing on his mind a little bit. He's a very confident young man. He did an interview with Sky Sports after the international break, before the game against Luton. And he said, look, I've probably not had the chances in the league that I've had in the Champions League. When they come, I'll find the back of the net.
Disagree with that.
Ironically, the game after that against Luton, he had that sitter, didn't he?
Yeah.
For a yard out when he could have hit it with his foot or his head, whatever.
He had a great headed chance in the second
as well. So he had two massive chances.
Before Lindelof.
There's been 4 games since then. He wasn't involved at Goodison Park. Obviously, he didn't start against Newcastle. But this goal is still proven elusive. It's frustrating, isn't it? Because for all we know, he is very raw. And he's a long-term prospect.
You're willing him to do well.
You are.
Just from an impartial perspective.
And I think supporters want him to score more than any other player, but it's for that reason.
He's got that connection with the supporters because I think since his debut, when he came on, had a really good impact against Arsenal, and the away fans really took to him. And then he had a couple of encouraging performances. He was decent against Brighton. He got a goal against Bayern Munich, and he thought he's on his way. And he did score against Brighton, but of course, as we mentioned earlier, it was rightly disallowed. But he has had a lot of chances in the Premier League. I mean, there was I suppose the most memorable one was the one-on-one against City, where he did just look like a callow 20-year-old striker with not a great deal of top-level football to his name. But
United knew they were getting that striker.
They did,
and there's always going to be patience needed with them.
That's why I think when it comes to analysing Højlund and criticising aspects of his game if he doesn't put a chance away, what do you expect from a 20-year-old who not even 2 years ago was still playing in Denmark and would then transfer to Austria, and then he had a kind of a mediocre goal scoring record in Italy, but we call it mediocre, but for him, his development, it was probably seen as fine. And then all of a sudden, it's Man United want you, and PSG also bid for him as well. So he's clearly someone who's got a lot of ability, and the potential is there. But as we said before, it's unfair of United to have put him into these circumstances where he's leading the line. He needed to have someone to learn his trade, allow him to learn his trade, come in for games. And that was the provisional plan for United in the summer, but they underestimated how Marcus Rashford would play as centre forward. And this is, I suppose, quite damning on United in terms of their planning. They didn't even mention Antony Marshall as a possible striker to come in when Højlund would come out of the team. Which again, so in terms of Højlund and his development, I think the bigger picture is it's a failing of the planning at United. They've invested a lot of money in him. Hopefully for them, he'll come good. He certainly has in the Champions League with his goals.
I think he's bound to come good. I think we saw enough. From the Champions League performances, his displays in the Premier League, yes, he's yet to get a goal, but I think he's got all the attributes and the tools to succeed in the Premier League long term. His power, his movement as well. His presence and movement is excellent.
His presence is the polar opposite of Marshall. With Marshall, you've got the invisible man.
If you're a centre half, you're laughing if Marshall's starting nine. It's an easy afternoon.
Thiago Silva would have known the other night that he was going to have a much tougher evening with Højlund starting rather than Marshall. And it was credit to TNT. I mean, I tweeted about it during the game of Marshall and Ten Hag arguing with each other, and they did show the footage of it. And a manager shouldn't be tolerating that from any player. I mean, Marshall was lucky to be on the bench the other night. He'd be lucky to play for United again, really. But because of the state of their attack, they do need those bodies, as they had to get a body in January in Weghorst. And with Weghorst, in fairness, he did try. His work rate wasn't questionable. If you could merge Weghorst and Marshall, you'd probably have the best striker in the world.
That's some statement.
But it just doesn't work that way, unfortunately, for United. And they've invested a lot of money in Højlund, and the word from the club as well is that if you spend that amount of money on a striker, you can't just spend another £70 million on a different striker. 12 months down the line. So it should reassure him that he's got that backing. But of course, if you're a Manchester United striker and you're not scoring goals, and if it occasionally costs the team, then you're in the limelight. Criticism is inevitable. But there haven't been too many occasions where I'd say that his profligacy or his impotence has outright cost the team. I think the games where he's had really good chances in, United have won them more often than not. I think maybe Palace at home, when they lost, he did have 2 or 3 good chances. And that was the worry during the Luton game, when he had those 2 excellent opportunities, one in the first half, one in the second half, both at 0-0. And you think, if they don't win this today, unfortunately, the story is going to be just quite naturally, Hoyland's not taking, the 72 million striker hasn't taken his chances.
As Lindelof to bailed him out over all people, wasn't it?
But it was a defender, as has been the case this season.
Yeah, nice little segue then. We'll quickly touch on Varane before moving to the press conference conversation. He had a sore back, he was out of the team again. It's just been...
Was he in training yesterday?
I mean, it's one thing after another this season, isn't it? And for tactical reasons, for injury reasons or whatever, we're approaching the January window. You obviously wrote the line that he wants to stay. But if this situation continues towards the end of the campaign in May, surely he's going to leave the club, because you can't have Rafael Varane, World Cup winner. Is he 31? He's
30.
So he's still not even that old. There will be other top clubs sniffing around him, surely, if it gets to that stage.
He's said that the 3 clubs he wants to play for in his career Lons.
He was in training.
Yeah, I thought so. Which, again, you see that and you think... Yeah. And just the word sore back, it seems like...
Sceptical, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think a lot of people were immediately sceptical of it. He's missed 1 game this season where he wasn't injured. He just needed 2 more rest days. And then 2 weeks later, he's not starting against Brentford. I think he missed the Newcastle League Cup game through illness, they said. He has been brittle. There's no denying that during his time at United. But it's undeniable that Ten Hag has got a downer on him at the moment. He started 1 of the last 12 games. I suspect tomorrow it'll be 1 out of 13. Johnny Evans, Victor Lindelof, Luke Shaw are all starting ahead of him at centre half. And again, talking about football being unpredictable, Varane was one of the top performers for United last season. Not only that, I think Casemiro is maybe the only other player that Ten Hag spoke more effusively about. He gushed about Varane so many times. And it's changed this season. And it is getting to the point now where it would be a surprise if Varane is at United next season. Maybe something could happen sooner. But
I know Ten Hag has his reasons, and he says for build-up play, he wants to have Maguire on that side, obviously. But I mean, it contradicts it when he's got Diego Dallo playing at left back. Obviously, he didn't play there on Wednesday night, but he's a right-footed player. He's playing at left back, so surely it's the same logic.
And he did adjust it because, of course, Lindelof is right-footed as well, and he's been playing on the left of defence. And Ten Hag said left-footers or players who are comfortable playing there, and he listed Lindelof, and Johnny Evans is right-footed as well. But in fairness, he's always, since I started watching him play for United back when he was in his late teens, early 20s, he did have a decent left peg on him, and he showed that against Burnley this season with the assist for Fernandes. And there are other circumstances, I'm sure, that a player can endear themselves to a manager, and Evans is a very cultured footballer. The way Evans plays, as I've said to you before, he's a better footballer than he is a defender. And you can imagine a Dutch manager who's managed Ajax really, really buying into that, because Frenkie de Jong started out as a centre half, dribbling the ball out of defence. Like I think in the Netherlands they make footballers rather than defenders, and some of them just happen to end up in defence. And Evans would not have looked out the place in an Ajax team or Ten Hag's Ajax side. So. These developments, I'm not saying we envisage them, because I certainly didn't envisage Johnny Evans, released by Leicester, starting ahead of Rafael Varane this season. I suppose what we would say is that the one meaningful performance Varane has had of late, when he came on quite early in Copenhagen, it was a disaster class. Unfortunately, he was all over the shop. And I can't imagine that's really helped his cause.
We'll get into the press conference story then. Obviously, early in the week, Ten Hag spoke on Tuesday, and Samuel Luckhurst wasn't there in attendance that day. The club took the decision to ban 4 outlets: Sky Sports, The Mirror, the MEN, and ESPN over stories of players losing confidence in Ten Hag, etc. Obviously, you did your own line. What were your thoughts on that? Do you want to expand on it? I know it's kind of a lot of social media
How long have you
talk.
got?
Well, exactly on Tuesday, but we'll keep it relatively. We'll not do a 10-minute segment on it. Is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I'll try not. I think I think one of the most crucial element in the whole matter that I think is lost on, I can imagine is lost on a lot of online fans, is that United have not once doubted the veracity of any of the stories, which I think is telling. In football journalism, there are certain stories, and there was a really good column on it in the Daily Mail after all this came out. There are certain stories where you absolutely will go to the club and to have a discussion about them and just check things out with them, especially legal matters. There are also stories where you kind of draw on your experience and your knowledge that you do not need to go to them over. These are the kind of stories until this week where it would have been absolutely pointless going to Manchester United about it. And as someone said to me, it's got to the point with, if this is the way forward that United want to work, it's almost tantamount to copy control, which they're not going to get, because they said they wanted to contextualise. They're able to contextualise through the manager twice a week at a press conference when he's asked questions. And I'm not having a dig at Ten Hag here at all whatsoever, because I don't believe that he imposed this ban whatsoever. I don't believe that he went to them and said, have you seen this, ban them or anything like that. It would have been taken by the communications side. But he said about, don't go behind our backs, come and talk to us. At the end of a press conference last week, because of Malacia's injury and the Reggie on loan situation with this break clauses in, he was asked at the end of it, will Reguilon stay? And he wasn't sure. And we thought, because he goes to a back room after the press conference, and he'll do his pre-match chat with one of the rights holders, and then he'll come out that door and he'll walk past us. And we thought, we'll ask him it, possibly off the record, on the record, whatever. And also, the last question of his press conference centred on Onana and AFCON, and he spoke about talks, and we thought we'll try and get some more context from that. He actually took the back door out to avoid us, with the communications director having said that we'd gone behind his back. That's absolutely not the case whatsoever. And I think it's also quite telling that if you think about Boris Johnson's premiership at number 10 were banning certain reporters from their lobby briefings. When you get into that territory, you are advertising how dysfunctional you are. And I've had conversations with people at United in the comms department about this week. When I got the news, it was kind of amusing that this WhatsApp group us journalists have, somebody wrote on it, has anyone been banned? I thought, it was out of the blue. A colleague said, yeah, I've just had a phone call, I've been banned. I'm thinking, I wrote that story, I've not been banned yet. And then my phone started ringing, Andrew Wardering. I thought, here comes the ban. And look, I think as I've said before, we're not on the club payroll. We're not cheerleaders. I think with this story, in retrospect, there was a story last year, I think in March or April time, on Sky Sports, about unsavoury leaks. That was the quote coming out of United in the last months of Rangnick's tenure. And it's almost become an in-joke among us journalists, like unsavoury leaks, like leaks at a football club, like, oh God, the horror, how scandalous can it be? Because it always happens. And it seems like now there is, and until this week it wasn't the case, but it now feels now that there's a concerted attempt to plug leaks and suppress stories from getting out there as much as possible. And as Ferguson said in one of his last books, in this day and age, it's impossible to do that. You can't be a control freak. You can't control the narrative. There was a story in the Daily Mail today about Ten Hag rejecting United players wanting more time off and different training times and things like that. And that's after a win in midweek. So you can imagine they might be in a bit of a flap about that, because there's a negative story after a positive performance and result against Chelsea. But if people are sourcing news and it's newsworthy and it's in, fans are going to be interested in it, then we're going to run it.
Surely a key thing here, Samuel, as well, if you did go to the club and the outlet went to the club with this story, they're not going to stand it up and they're not going to say that's absolutely correct. I think that's a key part.
And this is also probably second to them not doubting the veracity of the stories. This is the other key point. I've been told by people or a person at Manchester United before, there is no need to go to him about certain stories. So that's what I mean when you exercise your experience and your knowledge in handling situations. Do I need to go to the club about this? Until this week, the answer to that question would have been no. There will probably come a point where they get sick and tired of being bombarded about any story under the sun. And they've not got the time to do it as well. I mean, it's a really busy job being involved in comms at United, I'm absolutely sure. But there is a fundamental lack of understanding as to the way impartial football journalism works. We're not writing.
But is that not just, we're talking about, that's across the board here. You see that on social media. I think some supporters, not just United supporters, you see it with fans up and down the country, perhaps don't understand how journalists operate. And as you said, I think the key line, we're not cheerleaders, we're journalists. You're objective, you're impartial, you report the news. And that's a key point as well.
A United player asked me last year, he said, do you support us? He was quite wound up about it. And I said, journalism's an impartial industry. I think there are some there that really do expect the Evening News and other dedicated correspondents to be supporting them. And look, last season, when United had an undeniably successful season, there was a hell of a lot of positivity written in
It's fantastic, and we'd rather write about positive stories.
We would. It's easier for everyone. It really is. It makes everyone's life easier when things are going well, and you can do those pieces on the minutiae of what's making the club tick and why they're successful, and it's borderline heartwarming. But there has to be an acceptance that when things are going badly, and look, they've after Newcastle, that was their 10th defeat of the season before Christmas. There was bound to be negative coverage. But the other thing that I stress to them is that, true, absolutely, nobody criticises, because by virtue of my role, nobody criticises United more than me, but also nobody praises United more than me in terms of the amount of pieces, stories, etc., chat on these podcasts. It's even, it's weighted. And I mean, to be honest, I don't care what the perception is on the outside. Like I'll doubtless have had loads of abuse this week online, but one, I don't see it. Two, they would not say boo to a goose. They wouldn't come up to me and abuse me. I've never, ever been abused outright by a fan in all my time covering United. And as I said, it didn't happen the other night either. You just have to roll with the punches. But I think, as you touched upon in terms of like the industry, nobody in the industry, as far as I can see, has said what United have done has been the right move. It's, you're getting into tricky territory there. They obviously banned the Times last month over a story, but it wasn't it wasn't that newsworthy compared to when they ban 4 journalists or 4 outlets from a press conference. But I found it quite telling that the main communications chief actually came into the press room and spoke to journalists for the first time the other night on Wednesday after I'd spoken to them and just kind of given my thoughts on certain issues that there are in the communications department. And also, look, they're in an invidious position as well, because with the strategic review hopefully nearing its end, change is coming, and there are going to be people there on tenterhooks, and I sympathise with that, but you shouldn't be demonising journalists. And I told them when I was informed of my ban, I said, you need to look closer to home for this. There's a growing power base, shall we say, of players represented by an individual in PR. And if they don't think that's the biggest problem, or they don't think that's a problem, then they're ostriches. As I said, it's easy for them to demonise journalists because journalists are unpopular. And look, I've said before, journalism is not it's not a popularity contest. There are some who think it is, and they'll do United's bidding with these things, but they tend not to have actually ever stepped foot in Manchester. So it's been an interesting week, and I think that it's important to provide context and nuance, because I think the other funny thing about it is that if some United fans, it's quite strange that they'll slag off the club, they'll slag off the team, they'll slag off the players. And then if a journalist does it, is you can't slag off the team, you can't slag off the club, you can't slag off the players. Yeah. And if they're really believing what Manchester United say, and they really believe everything's okay after, the club shafted fans over the Super League, I think they need to take stock of their thoughts.
Well, that tweet is, I think I quote-tweeted your piece when you did the original Manchester Even Users band. I said, not a good look. I got my fair share of abuse. I think you always are playing for that, Samuel. Stick it up for you. Anyways, we'll leave it there for part 2, and we'll be back in the moment for part 3. Welcome back to part 3 of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, before we look ahead to the Bournemouth game, I've got a special offer here. Amazon Prime for the game on Boxing Day. Manchester United, of course, are welcoming Aston Villa to Old Trafford just a day after Christmas, which should be a cracker. Villa are in fantastic form, of course. But if you head to the description of this video, I don't know if you're watching on podcast from Spotify or Apple, what the instructions are, but I'm sure if you head across our socials, you'll find further details. But a 33-day trial there with Amazon Prime, I thought I'd give that a mention. So Samuel, Bournemouth on Saturday afternoon, 3 p.m. kickoff. Love those games, traditional slot. They're not usually conducive to a very good atmosphere, to be fair. But Bournemouth have actually improved in the last few weeks. For all you look at that fixture, probably a few weeks in advance, and you think this is a penalty kick. But it's going to be another, probably not a straightforward game, but in midweek, that performance, United have to build on that, and they should really be winning this.
I think there's a hell of a lot more confidence about United going into this game now after how they performed against Chelsea. And as you say, Bournemouth have picked up form a little bit, and I think they're 9 points clear of the relegation zone, which is pretty good going, because it seemed like maybe 2 months ago, Areola was getting the cliche dreaded vote of confidence, but he seems to have come through that tricky period. And I think purely because of United's form in the league this season and some of the wins they've had against teams at Old Trafford, the Forest game and the Luton game spring to mind, where they have had to grind it out. That's why you're always kind of wary where Bournemouth have come into town, and they've, I think, going back to the back end of last season when United went to Vitality, it was quite a narrow win. United played well in the first half, but where they weren't in a great run of form at the time, Bournemouth did have a decent opportunity towards.
Wasn't a great game, that.
No, it wasn't. It was a long way to go for as you say, a pretty unmemorable game. But importantly for United, they won, and that all but boxed off a Champions League place for them. And it was a bold decision by Bournemouth not to keep Gary O'Neill, because I thought he was possibly the manager of the year last season in the Premier League. He did a tremendous job to keep them up, given that he came in in late August, early September after Scott Parker was sacked, and he's a really impressive. He's doing pretty well at Wolves, and he's quite an impressive talker as well. So you do wonder whether, as well as Bournemouth been doing recently, whether they got that decision right. But going back to United, I think it's got to just be a case of maintain what you did in midweek. There's no reason not to. There's a 3-day gap between the games. I don't think fatigue can be really played on. That I think at the risk of getting ahead of ourselves, if you want to be ultra optimistic, it would be to try and get the game won in reasonable time, so you can start resting players ahead of Bayern on Tuesday, and then you've got Liverpool on Sunday. So this has been a big week for United. It's probably going to be a bigger week next week. And as decent a team as Bournemouth are, I think it does help that they've got not in between, but during this period, there's this game there against a bottom half of the table side at Old Trafford at a Saturday 3 p.m. kickoff, where it is going to be quite quiet. The eyes of the world aren't going to be on the game. And it's an opportunity for certainly it could be a serene day, but we thought it was going to be a serene day against Palace in late September, and United were beaten in that one. But I think most people would fancy United going into this one after the way they played in midweek.
Keep this very quick then, because I know you need to get to Karen in. In terms of the starting lineup, I'd probably keep it the same, to be fair. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
You've not done your palo yet. And as well,
I suppose we'll see whether Lindelof is injured or not. He wouldn't have trained yesterday because they'd had a recovery session.
I wanted to draw your eye to the table as well, because it's absolutely bizarre when you look at the Premier League table. United sitting in 6th on 27 points, level with Tottenham Hotspur, who have done fantastic, and Newcastle, who everyone's been praising as well. But Newcastle are below United on 26 points, which is remarkable when we've been sitting on this podcast for months. We've all watched the performances. As you said, they've been kind of just getting away with it and grinding out points. And yeah, 3 points behind Manchester City, level with Spurs, and above Newcastle. It's bizarre, isn't it?
It almost it highlights the merit of the American sport policy of not having draws. I think we're the only team in the Premier League that haven't drawn a game this season. Unfortunately for United, the one draw was against Galatasaray, which was a game they should have won. And I think that gives you an idea of what it's been like watching United this season, where it's been either just win or lose, and that the football, going into that Chelsea game, I said to you, I said, this is going to be a kamikaze contest. And somehow, it ended 2-1. It could have ended 6-3. There were so many chances, and so many, not just good chances, but great chances, to glaring chances. I mean, Chelsea could have nicked an equaliser right at the death when Broja hit the post with a header. And I suppose that would be the one area, looking at United's performance in midweek, and Ten Hag said that they play the way I'd like to see them play, and that's absolutely true. I don't think anybody would dispute that. And if there's going to be a helter-skelter element, you get away with it, so be it, because it's crowd-pleasing football, it's entertaining to watch as well. But Chelsea, by virtue of United not being able to completely box off games, by and large, apart from the Everton one, and that was kind of it was a strange one in the sense that United were uncharacteristically clinical, but when you looked at their chances, it was 4 attempts on target. One was a wonder goal, one was a penalty, one was a counter-attack. 2 really good goals, the first and the third. But it was an un-United performance for not keeping him the way they've gone about games this season. And I suppose where they've always been taking games right to the death and winning by 1 goal. That's the reason why, although they're 3 points behind City, it's as good as 4 points because of the goal difference. So that's always going to be an area where they are still quite porous, where you think, if they could really do with giving a team a hiding. And if Bournemouth are that team...
that last season, though, and it just kind of didn't come.
No, it didn't, did it? I think there were, were there 2 games last season where they scored 4 goals in? Betis and Chelsea, perhaps. Villa in the League Cup was 4-2. That
Forest away as well, was it 3-0?
3-0, that was, yeah. But I don't think they've scored... They can't have scored 5 goals yet in a game under Ten Hag, I don't think. And so it's probably, by and large, unsustainable, but they have managed to sustain it to a certain extent, incurring 6 defeats along the way in the run up to Christmas. But that's, as the table shows at the moment, it's not going to be good enough to finish in the top 4, and that has to be the main objective now, because they're not going to win the title. I think they've done well not to be cut adrift in terms of qualification for the Champions League, and that's by virtue of them either having this insistence on losing games or winning games. I remember at Fulham, Rich saying, when it seems destined to end 0-0, he said, like, what the hell's your angle on this? And I was completely at a loss, because it was a game that seemed to be meandering to a pretty dull conclusion. Then United got their late goal, and it changes the narrative.
Thank you very much for your time, Samuel. We'll leave it there for the podcast.
Thank you, Stephen.
And thanks to listeners as usual. Leave a nice little review if you enjoyed this podcast. 5 stars, it does help. But if you didn't enjoy it, don't bother. Head across to YouTube, of course, and our other social channels, TikTok, etc. And we'll be back on Monday ahead of the Bayern Munich game. So have a great weekend and take care.